It's interesting because now I live in Alaska, and so previously from New Zealand I went to Antarctica, and you leave your home in New Zealand, which is just like a life, for example, in Europe or in England or in many places in America. You fly down and you're in Antarctica, and it's this incredible experience, and everything is totally different, and you're isolated, but then you come back. And now I live in Alaska, and you're in this polar environment all the time. So it's subpolar where I live in Fairbanks, is just below the Arctic Circle. In the winter we have as few as 3 hours daylight in the middle of winter, and we have basically 24-hour daylight in the summer. And the people that we interact with are the local people that live in Barrow, which is the northernmost town in Alaska where we do field work. And that's a really incredible experience. Instead of having in Antarctica, you have people from New Zealand who are field support. When we do research in the field in Barrow, we're going out with Inupiaq people. So the local people that have lived in this area have grown up. We have to worry about polar bears, of course, up there, so someone has to carry a gun, and these guys are hunters. They know how polar bears move, they know how, so we can get on with doing our work, and these guys are looking out for us. And it's really neat to go back to Barrow and do field work and establish, you know, relationships with these guys. My path into polar science was kind of an indirect one. I first started at university. I studied mathematics and physics, and then I got to a point where I realized, you know what, I don't want to spend the rest of my life in a lab, and I have a lot of interest in the outdoors, and so I tried to bring those two things together, and a project came up that involved sea ice in Antarctica, and it also involved doing research fieldwork in the Arctic in Alaska. So that really appealed to me. I became involved in this project, and from New Zealand I had the opportunity to travel to Antarctica. I did work on sea ice in Antarctica, also in Alaska. So my current research really has two aspects. One of it is on what we call the microstructure of sea ice, so looking at sea ice on a really small scale. So we know at the moment that there's a lot of interest in the large-scale behavior of sea ice. Is it melting? Is it receding? What's its future going to be? And the way we can try and predict those futures is using sophisticated computer models. But in order to do that accurately, we need to know what are the properties of the ice itself. So looking at sea ice on the very small scale to understand more on the medium scale and then more on the large scale. Everyone tries to say, well, I've done this in the coldest possible temperatures, and sometimes people in warmer places don't really understand the effect of, you know, these cold temperatures. And you think, well, it's 20 degrees Celsius or it's 0 degrees Celsius. What's the real difference if you go to -10 or -20 or -30? And there's a huge difference. It gets really, really cold, and it affects you in strange ways. So I was helping a friend do research on lake ice, and he was away, so his supervisor said, why don't you come with me and I'll show you how to do it. And we went out and did some measurements on lake ice. It was -5 Celsius, and that's quite warm. When you live in Alaska and you're used to it, it feels quite warm, and it's very comfortable. You can work with light gloves and not much of a jacket, and you're fine. The next week the supervisor was away and I had to help my friend. He said now it was -50 Celsius. So it went from -5 to -50, and it does incredible things to your body and almost to your mind. You get out of a car which is warm and try and do work, and you just, everything you can do to stay focused and think, because your whole body is tight and you need to relax, and things you don't think about. If you have big warm gloves, but as soon as you hold something you lose heat through your hands, so you're trying to hold things as lightly as possible, and you work for half an hour and then you rush back in the car and try and get warm, and it makes you realize, you know, these places aren't for people really. We're only there because of these modern conveniences, I guess, in many ways, and it gives you a real appreciation for the native people that live in these environments. You know, how do they survive? Mm-hmm. So that's my cold temperature story. I think -56 was the coldest that we did field work.